What is the Chinese Communist Party's way of war? We're going to find out today, and it doesn't sound good. Apparently, they've been at war with us in 60 different ways and around the sun for several decades now, and we've got an expert to help us check it out. So strap in. It's going to be a fast ride full of knowledge on the Rob Maness Show. Fake news media often sounds the warning alarm that Russia poses the greatest threat to America's national security. But serious national security experts know the real threat is just a bit further east. While those in power have been distracted and disorderly, China has waged a six-front war on America's economy, her military, her diplomacy, her technology, her education, and infrastructure. And they're winning. Is it too late to undo the shocking, though nearly invisible, victories of the Chinese? Well, our guest today in his book, Stealth War, retired Air Force Brigadier General Robert Spalding reveals China's motives and secret attacks on the West. He chronicles how our leaders have failed to protect us over recent decades. He provides shocking evidence of some of China's most brilliant activities, including placing Confucius Institutes in universities across the United States that serve to monitor and control Chinese students on campus and spread communist narratives to unsuspecting American students. They offer enormous sums to American experts who create investment funds that funnel technology to China. And they've signed a 30-year agreement with the United States that allows China to share peaceful nuclear technology, ensuring that they have access to American nuclear know-how. Spalding's concern isn't merely that America could lose its position on the world stage, but even more urgently, the Chinese Communist Party has a fundamental loathing of the legal protections America grants its people and seeks to create a world without those rights. Despite all the damage done so far, General Spalding shows how it's still possible for the U.S. and the rest of the free world to combat and win China's stealth war. But we haven't even addressed China's vast influence operations that are ongoing right now, today, as the country is roiled with violence by leftist extremist groups. What are their current actions in this crisis? Are they actively engaged with the groups like Antifa as they coordinate and execute their field operations? Is China's myriad of financial wealth capabilities being used to fund these operations? Is there evidence indicating their involvement? And what does it look like if there is? Well, today, again, we're honored to have the author of Stealth War, retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Rob Spalding, as our guest, as we take a deep dive into further understanding what the Chinese Communist Party is doing and how we can still defeat them in this war. Retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Rob Spalding, the author of Stealth War and an expert on the Chinese Communist Party's war against the West and the United States in particular. General Spalding, sir, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I hope you and your family are doing well during this time of uncertainty and those kind of things. And I do want to talk later on in the segment about what we think China may be involved in as far as the violence and the lawlessness that's what's going on in the riots these days, the last week or so. But first, give our audience a view into the 6 modes of warfare, basically, that you lay out in your book of what the Chinese have been doing to us for 20 years, 30 years or more, from the not just a military perspective, obviously, but more importantly, from the whole war perspective. You call it a stealth war. Why is that?
Well, because it's war without rules. It's war in using the day-to-day. It's really about undermining our society and our economy from within, using the tools of globalization and the internet. And so I do talk about the six kind of areas which are economic and technological and military and diplomatic and educational and infrastructure. But really, the main effort is economic. And so they use monetary policy, industrial policy, and trade policy to create an economy that's parasitic on the United States. And it's bled our industrial base down to nothing. We lost over 70,000 factories, 5 million manufacturing jobs, our ability really to sustain and replenish not only the military, but as we found during the coronavirus, our medical supplies. And it's really left millions of Americans wondering about the American dream, these long-term jobs with health benefits and retirement benefits. And it's led to a whole host of other issues. In addition, you got things like fentanyl, which is being sold into the U.S. and contributes to the death of 50 to 60,000 people a year, every year. Not just the coronavirus, but every year we're losing 50 to 60,000 Americans to the drug trade coming from China. And then, of course, all of our corporate sector, our political institutions, our academic institutions, and Wall Street are influenced by these financial and economic relationships they have with the Chinese Communist Party. So all in all, it's what we thought after the end of the Cold War was that America would really be able to promote free markets and democracy abroad. And what's happened is, rather than that, what we see in our international institutions and increasingly at home is the spread of communism. And so communism's on the rise. It's on the march. It's not just in the WHO, the World Health Organization. It's also right here in our own living rooms.
That's exactly right. That's my view also, sir, and why I've taken to writing and doing a lot of interviews with China experts from different perspectives. And would you characterize what they're doing as a Cold War or Cold War plus, or not really? I mean, I know they're primarily economic, and there are some things we definitely need to do, like make their corporations have to follow SEC rules that all American corporations do, and today they don't. They don't even get audited to stay in the SEC. But what about nuclear forces and those kind of things? I personally don't see them as the same type of force buildup organization or country that we liken to in the Soviet Union Communist Party days. But I think that's changing. I sense that is changing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, they've been relying on a strategic policy of minimum deterrence, which meant that they have only a few thousand nuclear weapons. Some say just a few hundred. That being said, they recently produced the DF-41, which is a multiple independently targeted reentry vehicle, ICBM, or intercontinental ballistic missile, which means one missile can take out 10 cities. That's not a minimum deterrence weapon. That's actually much more on the order of what was existing prior to a lot of the treaties between the United States and the Soviet Union. So we demerved all of our ICBMs. So all of our intercontinental ballistic missiles only have one weapon on them. It's an extremely destabilizing weapon, and it signals a new kind of arms race essentially coming from China. In addition to that, they have thousands of intermediate and conventional intermediate range ballistic and cruise missiles, which can be used to threaten their neighbors. They have a larger Navy now than the United States. They have the J-20 and other advanced stealth fighters. They're building a stealth bomber. They've got a quantum communication satellite system. They've got brand new aircraft carriers. They're building really capable submarines. All in all, they've got a very, very formidable military now. And what we have to be aware of is the need to continue this deterrence of their military aggressiveness. And so far, I don't consider them to be a military threat. That being said, they are producing a lot of capability that leads to an imbalance in the region, and ultimately, an imbalance creates this idea of provocative weakness, which might encourage them to attack, say, a Taiwan, because they have so much power or seeming power on the other side.
Yeah, and mentioning Taiwan, we see what is happening with the national security law they're trying to impose on Hong Kong, which is really breaking the agreements that they signed about 27 years earlier or so, before, as Taiwan was supposed to be a separate entity within communist China, and they've broken their word on that. A lot of folks see that in the national security world that I'm talking to as the next threat will be against Taiwan. Is that your assessment also?
Well, I hope that that's delayed a little bit. Hong Kong's fairly easy. It's already considered to be in the fold of the Communist Party. Of course, they signed a treaty, the Chinese Communist Party did, with the UK. And that was supposed to be, Hong Kong was supposed to be independent for 50 years, which was supposed to last until 2047. And of course, the Chinese Communist Parties have essentially reneged on that treaty and are now in the process of destroying the freedoms that are in Hong Kong. Of course, they have used Hong Kong for a window to Western capital markets. So it's been extremely lucrative for China to use Hong Kong because we treat Hong Kong differently than the mainland. I think what the president has said last week is that we're no longer going to treat Hong Kong differently. We're going to treat it more like the mainland, which means it's going to be tremendously damaging to China's economy.
Yeah, that's long been the Chinese Communist Party's proper of the country's pathway into capitalism, as they try to keep it veiled from their people while they're trying to get more prosperous. So removing most favored nation status from Hong Kong, and setting requirements for those corporations that are treated much like Western corporations, where they have to meet our laws in the stock exchange and those kind of things, is the right move, in my view, for the president to take. Is there anything more that he needs to be doing financially? I've heard a couple of things, but I was just curious if you would recommend he take further steps on the financial and economic side to put a damper on this whole effort.
Oh, certainly. Tariffs, I would make tariffs permanent against China. They're a non-market-based economy. They really have tariff and non-tariff barriers in China, and then away from China, they subsidize their companies. I would prevent from allowing our retirement funds and other investors in the United States from investing in Chinese companies, which, as you mentioned, don't have to meet audit and transparency requirements. And then finally, I would prevent U.S. corporations from sending manufacturing to China. I think they ought to bring it back home. Apple has $260 billion in cash because they've been manufacturing in China, which is a country that has terrible labor laws and terrible environmental laws, and they ought to bring them back to North America. Either the United States proper, or Canada, or Mexico, some nation where we have a trade agreement where we actually can enforce the trade in terms of being fair and reciprocal. I think if we do that, you're going to see enormous economic growth in the United States. And I think the other thing that what we need to do is take some of the defense budget and invest in infrastructure and science and technology research, and in stimulating the return of manufacturing. We were sending our students to school on the behalf of federal grants for the space race. All of these things, the investment in basic science research and investing in scientists and engineers here in the United States really led to unprecedented economic growth. Those are things that we need to get back to doing. We just got out of the habit of investing in our people and in our country for 30 years.
Yeah, I think it's my opinion. I think we need to retool from a foreign policy and national security perspective, and design a future, a strategy moving us into the future that's more along the lines of the way we handled the Soviet Union as the West, and really focus the majority of our resources on the things you're talking about. Back in the day, you and I are both Cold Warriors. Strategic Air Command is an example of that was totally focused on countering the Soviet threat, And as we're moving forward here, it certainly looks like this threat that's on the rise, even militarily, is changing to look more and more like the old Soviet communist style threat. And you mentioned the infiltration of the higher education system here in the United States in your book, and how they use that to influence American students by setting up these, I think they're Confucius Institutes to monitor their own students that are going to school here in the United States. But it's influencing that. And that leads me to one of the other questions I wanted to touch on briefly and get your thoughts on it is are they using that in their financial capabilities to do anything with this current crisis? The president has called out this Antifa group as terrorists. Those of us that have been observing that for several years now happen to agree with him. They are a domestic terrorist organization and have taken some violent acts several times, and they are highly organized, but it's a different kind of organization. Yet, do you think the Chinese are covertly using their capabilities they put here to influence that or fund it or direct it in any way?
Well, the whole point of creating the Great Firewall, and of course the Russians from unplugging their internet from the greater internet, is really a realization by those authoritarian governments that social media platforms are really good for stirring up trouble in a country. Of course, they blame us every time they have protests and not themselves, because that's the nature of their regimes. But here in the United States, what they do is they use social media bots, AI-powered bots that actually pump up the emotion of an issue. And so during the coronavirus, 40% of the social media posts were bots. These are state actors that are trying to essentially get our population to panic. At the same time, what's going on with the riots and the looting, they're doing the same thing. There's bots inciting people to go to these areas, and so in a lot of ways there's a pile-on effect where something will happen. They'll start ginning up the bots, which will start to incite a frenzy, and then more and more people will be attracted to that frenzy. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire, and essentially that's how they're using it. So we in the United States recognize that, and in 2017 the national security strategy that I worked on said we should build a nationwide secure 5G network, and that was really about understanding their influence in our society and building a network where we can actually protect our society from that outside influence. Right now the telecom industry doesn't want to do that. I think the federal government's paralyzed in terms of understanding the importance of Silicon Valley's technologies and business models to influence our society, and the Chinese have totally figured it out. That's what Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei are about. It's about harnessing this power for not just their economic benefit, but also to undermine our society, and they're very, very good at it, just like the Russians are, and they work in tandem, because the more that you have instigating, the more actually, more chaos that you can create.
Yeah, but their effort makes that Russian effort in the 2016 election look like child's play.
It really does.
From what I can see, and they're very powerful in that. And the way Antifa works is they're a flat organization, loosely organized cells. They don't have hierarchical leadership. But we've seen them operate at the events, and what they do is have 4 or 5 people that guide protesters. They hang around and wait, and they pass messages to different types of people. Then 1 or 2 of them will start a violent act after they've seeded the crowd with their messaging, and I would not be surprised if they're using that messaging from the Chinese operations that just seed the web, as you said, with all kinds of negative information that gets people ginned up.
Yeah, and quite frankly, we do a poor job as a country in identifying that activity because of our laws. Our laws. So the Global Engagement Center, which is an agency within the State Department, was designed in order to counter this social media platform influence. The problem is our privacy laws prevent them collecting data on Americans. So now, our ability to see into this influence going on is, essentially non-existent. So we need a network where, privacy can be kept for American citizens, but at the same time we have insight into, the Chinese and the Russians and others who would come in and create chaos in our society. It's just a fundamental need in terms of national security in a globalized, internet-connected world. And until we figure that out, we're going to continue to have problems with these people who have the ability to really create chaos and then inflame things to where you have cities burning all over the United States.
That's a daunting task, especially since we're obviously behind. Can we actually win, General, against this war? It looks like there's been a lot of victories for the Chinese in all the various areas, especially economically and in the information space. But is there a way for us to win in the long run?
Yeah, the Chinese system is no different than the Soviet system. It's really a closed society, and it really feeds off the innovation, technology, talent, and capital of the United States. So as long as we continue to give them those things, then yes, they're going to be successful, and they're going to undermine our economy and our society. But when we begin to cut that off, and if we secure our internet, now they have a much more difficult time in getting that intellectual property and getting that capital and getting that talent to come over and help them with what they're doing. And then they have to really rely on their own system, which is a failed system. Chinese companies are not more efficient than U.S. companies. Their state-owned enterprises are probably about 12% less efficient than a U.S. company. That means their economy is less efficient, and we force them to kind of rely on themselves. The whole thing's going to become bust. We're in an economic competition, and what we were able to do was bankrupt the Soviet Union. The way we've connected ourselves, again, China's almost like a parasite on the United States. It allows them to bankrupt us, and so we just need to cut ties, begin to invest in our own people and our own country. And what's going to happen? We're going to compete. We're going to compete, but we're not going to be giving everything that we make to them in order for them to dominate us. And when that happens, their economy is just not going to be able to keep up.
Absolutely right, sir. I appreciate you coming on with us. And it seems like the old song to you and I, the Soviet communist playbook is the Chinese communist playbook, and they continue to use it. They just use it at even higher levels in the digital and globalized world. Sir, how can folks find you and get a copy of your book?
They can come to my website, generalspalding.com. My book's sold just about everywhere, and I'm on Twitter, Robert_Spalding, Spalding know you, and come and join the conversation. Really, we're trying to educate and advocate to show the importance of democratic principles and free trade, and really what the Chinese Communist Party. They really have created a really unique system that allows them to erode our competitiveness over time. And we just need to cut them out of it. And once we do, we're going to be fine.
I think so too. And we just got to get ourselves back together and get a Western and a United States-led strategy going to take on these challenges and get the road set right. Thanks a lot, General Rob Spalding, author of Stealth War, for joining us on the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Thank you.
Well, my friends, we do certainly appreciate a China expert like retired Brigadier General Rob Spalding coming on and talking to us about his ideas for detecting and defeating the Chinese Communist Party's wars on America and the West. So until next week, this is Rob Maness.